Hey folks, my name is Brian. Welcome back to Poli-Tic Talks. So in today's video, I'm going to be analyzing 3 votes that happened on March 14th in the United States Congress, which some have analyzed signify a shift away by Republican members of Congress from the president. I'm going to be talking about what I think about whether or not that's true or not, and I'm going to be talking about some of the context surrounding those votes. So let's get started. The first vote I'm going to be looking at occurred in the House of Representatives. It was a vote to demand that the Attorney General fully release the report by Special Counsel Robert Mueller to the Congress upon its completion. The reason that this vote, I believe, made headlines is because it was completely unanimous, passing 420 to 0. And the House of Representatives is notorious for being unable to cooperate even in the most basic issues. So the Republican members of the House of Representatives did go along with this vote, obviously, because it was unanimous, but they were quoted as saying that they went along with this even though they trusted Mr. Barr to submit Mr. Mueller's report to the Congress regardless of whether or not he was compelled to do so by a vote in the House of Representatives. For the Democrats' part, they fear Attorney General William Barr's vague answers that he gave during his confirmation hearing in the Senate. When asked if confirmed he would release the report by Mr. Mueller to the Congress, Mr. Barr gave an answer that some Democrats felt was too vague. He said that he would simply follow the law. There's concern among Democratic lawmakers that Mr. Barr could use the regulations and the norms of the Justice Department, which he is now the head of, to protect President Trump from any potential allegations of wrongdoing. It has been Justice Department policy not to release any negative information on individuals that have been investigated if they are not being charged with a crime. The reason this is important is because it is also Justice Department policy that a sitting president cannot be indicted. What this means is, if there is negative information that has been collected on the president by Robert Mueller's investigation, it would be legal for the Attorney General William Barr to conceal this information from Congress because he cannot and therefore would not be charged with a crime. In terms of whether or not this unanimous vote signifies that the Republican members of the House of Representatives are finally beginning to turn against the president, I would caution anybody who falls into that line of thinking, and I'll explain why. So, in the House of Representatives, there are several members that are infamous for having been staunch supporters of President Trump, even through all the scandals of his presidency. I'm thinking in particular of Representative Jim Jordan, Representative Mark Meadows, and Representative Devin Nunes. So a logical question might be to ask, if they defend the president so strongly, why did they vote to make this report public? What I think is happening here is they intend to cherry-pick and spin information contained within the report for partisan objectives. If they've defended the president through allegations of marital misconduct or obstruction of justice or witness tampering, it's logical to assume that they would also defend him even though a damning report was released to Congress. They can cherry-pick the information they like that exonerates the president and ignore the information that damages him. And if they voted against this, they would simply be sticking their necks out for no political gain. So the next vote that I want to analyze was a vote in the United States Senate to pull U.S. support from the Saudi-led war in Yemen. This resolution passed 54 to 46 in the Senate. So the first thing to note about this vote is that it's already been taken in the Senate and passed along similar lines. The reason they're taking it again is because when it was taken in December of 2018, it then moved to the House of Representatives in order to become law, but because the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives at that time, the bill failed. It's expected to pass this time because Democrats now control the House of Representatives. The Senate resolution aims to end U.S. involvement in the conflict within 30 days of it becoming law. Another important thing in this particular vote is that the U.S. involvement in the Saudi-led war in Yemen actually began under President Obama. It's important to note that the Saudi government has condemned this vote and the U.S. Senate's interference based on, quote, untrue allegations. Many U.S. lawmakers have been critical of the United States' role in the Yemen conflict over the last few months, based on the high number of civilian deaths in the conflict, as well as the Saudi Crown Prince's role in the death of reporter Jamal Khashoggi, who was critical of the Saudi administration. Based on classified information that they've received from the intelligence community, the U.S. Senate has named the Saudi Crown Prince as being responsible for Jamal Khashoggi's murder. This finding is in line with information that was leaked by the CIA as well as the Turkish government. Members of the Senate have expressed dissatisfaction with President Trump's reaction to the Khashoggi killing, particularly because President Trump's most controversial statement on this matter was to parrot the official Saudi response to these allegations, saying that Mr. Khashoggi had been killed by rogue killers. In terms of whether or not this vote to end U.S. involvement in the war in Yemen is a rebuke of President Trump by the Republican members of the Senate, I believe that if an argument is to be made that any of the votes I'm looking at in this video are in fact a rebuke of the president, I think the case could be strongest made in this particular case. In terms of my analysis of this vote, I think it's important to underline the fact that the considerations for a senator when taking a vote are slightly different for most congressmen and congresswomen. The reason for that is that senators represent entire states, whereas congressmen and congresswomen represent districts of particular states. In many of these congressional districts, they're heavily gerrymandered by the Democrat and the Republican parties. For those of you who don't know, gerrymandering is the process of drawing district lines based on political considerations. What this means in terms of the House of Representatives is that you get extremely partisan or ideologically driven members of the House of Representatives, as opposed to in the Senate, where a lot of them can be more moderate because they represent a much larger group of people. Because the winds of publicity have been blowing against the Saudi war in Yemen and the U.S. involvement there, it makes sense that the Senate would have a stronger reaction to something like this than would happen in the House of Representatives because they represent such a wide group of people. So because of President Trump and his family's business ties to Saudi Arabia, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, presumably which has been ordered by the Crown Prince according to the Senate, and the high number of civilian casualties in the war in Yemen, it makes sense that the Senate would have a reaction and be affected by these factors in voting to end the war. So on February 15th, following the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, the President of the United States declared that illegal immigration over the Mexican border was a national emergency. The declaration of a national emergency would give the President the ability to acquire funds which Congress had already decided were not to be used, that the President could then put towards the border wall that he promised in the election campaign. The reason that this move is controversial, and bear in mind that I'm going to stay away from the debate about whether or not that the President's claim that illegal immigration should be considered a national emergency is valid. I'm going to stay away from that debate. I am going to analyze this vote on the basis of a division of powers argument. The legislative branch of the United States government, which includes the House of Representatives and the Senate, have what they call the power of the purse. This means that they are able to allocate funds to be publicly distributed. The only instance in which the President is able to determine which funds are directed to which projects, or which goals, I should say, are in the case of a national emergency, which he is in his right as the head of the executive branch of government to declare. On March 14th, the Senate voted 59-41 to negate the President's declaration of a national emergency to acquire funds to build his wall. So the more astute observers in the audience may note that the number of Republicans that defected to the Democratic side for this vote was greater than in the previous case, and I'm going to be presenting my theory as to why that might be. The reason I mention this in terms of the analysis is because I don't believe that this vote against this national emergency was actually about President Trump. I actually think this is about the senators trying to protect their own lane and jurisdiction. So ever since the presidency of Richard Nixon in the 70s, there has been the impression that the executive branch has been slowly creeping into the lane of the legislative branch in terms of different responsibilities. I believe this vote in the Senate on March 14th was simply the senators drawing a line in the sand, saying that it was a step too far for the executive branch to try to take money that the Congress and the Senate has already said was not to be allocated for the border wall, and then to simply roll over their decision. The border wall, if you weren't following the news, was the crux of the longest shutdown in government history, which the United States has just gone through. In my view, the number of Republican senators that defected to the Democratic side in the case of this national emergency rebuke was simply them defending their constitutional duty from executive overreach. Because the Senate did not reach the 60-vote threshold that would override a presidential veto, President Trump immediately vetoed this resolution and has maintained the national emergency. While I am predicting at this point that there will be legal challenges and political challenges to the president's national emergency in the future, at the moment the veto has stood. My point mainly regarding this vote is that I don't think it was particularly about the presidency of Donald Trump. I think it was about the office of the president in general. So to say that this vote signifies a massive change towards a rebellion within the Republican Party against the president, I don't see that happening. For example, if the House decided to introduce impeachment proceedings, I don't think he would reach the 60-vote threshold required to convict in an impeachment trial in the Senate. Anyway, guys, I think that's it for me on this one. Please feel free to like and subscribe. And any information that I've used in this analysis and any analysis on any of my videos can be found in the description of the video. Take care, guys.